Hello and welcome back to St Michael's Hill. On today's video I'm going to be looking at this fuel point from Nightwing Kits. I think I did a little video where I was constructing this quite a while back and I left it in a grey prime state. So since then I've managed to kind of get it painted to what would be a fairly new sort of state. There's kind of concrete effect on the floor with kind of black metal on the grates, and then the various bits of kind of metal and wood have all been kind of painted up. So we've got kind of what it would be in a kind of new condition. In this video, I'm going to take it from that to what would probably be in a kind of working condition, so a lot more weathered. And there's going to be a few kind of different products and the different kind of styles of weathering that I'm going to be used to kind of make that happen. And hopefully, fingers crossed, it all goes fairly well. So let's talk a little bit more about what I'm trying to achieve. Here's an image from RM Web that shows a very similar fueling point and gives you an idea of the sort of weathering that I'm going to be looking to do on the kit that I've got here. As you can see on the floor, there's kind of lots of kind of dark browns and some greens and some greys and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to be trying to get a similar kind of pattern, potentially a little bit kind of more concrete and less of the green, but it certainly gives you an idea. The fueling point itself is obviously kept in fairly good nick. Although obviously there is a little pockets of rust that you can see around, which I'll be trying to model, and then there'll be a kind of an all over feel that's not quite been tidied up right. There's kind of hoses on the floor and all that sort of thing. So again, something I'm going to be trying to kind of get the feel of with the kit. So as per the picture you've just seen, I'm going to be trying out similar effects on this kit. So as we saw in the picture, the ground cover generally is kind of very, very stained with kind of diesel and where there's been kind of weather effects, and there's almost that kind of green, I guess, is it algae or something like that that's kind of affected. So I'm going to try and recreate some of that on the floor, and that's going to kind of go all over. The roof here is kind of meant to replicate kind of metal sheeting, so I'm going to take this kind of white look and kind of give it a lot more kind of weathering. So there'll be kind of rust spots and all that sort of stuff, and general kind of weather damage, so that will kind of be a lot darker and a lot more grim, especially kind of in the guttering around the centre there. That's going to be quite a darkened up area. And also where those gutters obviously lead is down the end here, so the water from those gutters will probably be just pouring out kind of around this sort of area. So I'm going to look at kind of basically making that a little bit more obvious in the weathering, so just kind of really kind of give that a lot of kind of water kind of damage and all that sort of stuff. The equipment under here would generally be kept in fairly decent nick. I will kind of darken up and give it a bit more of a kind of muddy kind of look, but there's certainly not going to be kind of rust around all that sort of stuff, as the general equipment would be kept in good use. What will be rusted, however, is these barrels. I've painted one in black and one in a metallic silver, and I'm going to add rust to those. Generally, there's lots of kind of barrels, things like this, that live outside and would kind of get quite a kind of rust kind of coating to them. So I'll be doing that as well. So then, what am I going to be using to create some of the effects? First up is some Town & Country Scenics Rustic. Now, I've not used this stuff before, but many other modelers have, and the demonstrations that you see it shows are very, very impressive. So it's basically a two-part kind of process. There's a dark rust colour and a lighter rust colour. I think the textures within the paint is fairly rough, so I will have a kind of look at that and experiment with kind of ways that that can be used. Generally, it's kind of meant to be used kind of both at a time, but I will have a look at certain areas, maybe just having one of the colours, or we'll see how that looks. So that's what I'm going to be using to create kind of all the rust patterns. For some of the darker areas, I'm going to take some weathering powders and actually make a wash out of them, using just a bit of water, and to see if I can kind of create a nice kind of dark wash out of weathering powders and water, and see how that works. So I'm going to just use some of this MIG Fantasy Pigments, which is if you're looking for the number, it's F600 rocket exhaust. So it's a very black kind of colour. I'll mix that fairly sparingly with water to create a kind of nice thin wash that I'll be able to kind of use as a kind of overall kind of wash for a lot of the areas as a starting point. As well as that, I'm going to use just acrylic paints and in a combination of dry brushing and washing to kind of create various approaches and techniques. So enough of the introduction, let's get to work. So I've taken all the parts that weren't fully glued down off to just make this job easier. So basically left with this as what's on here. Where I was kind of getting a little ahead of myself, I kind of glued some of these objects in place before I'd weather them. I think often it's a good idea to kind of keep some of it off, especially like it's not so much of a problem with this because obviously it's a big unit and there will be lots of weathering around it, but it would have been nice to maybe remove some of these little bits like I have done at this end, but it's not a problem. The other thing that will be removed completely is the lights. What they're meant to represent under here. I will end up putting some LEDs or a little strip LED under each side of here, so I will remove these, so don't worry that they're not already painted. So yeah, moving on, I will start with kind of a dark wash that I'm going to place over most of the floor to try and pick out some of the detailing, and also I will apply it to the roof of the shelter there, as well as maybe the top of the kind of fuel pump here. So the first layer of the wash has been added now, and already you can see it's making quite a big difference. It's really picked out a lot of that detail. There's lots of kind of dirt now in between all of the cracks. Once that dries off, it'll probably tone down a little bit, but generally fairly happy with it. I'm going to add it to the roof now, and we'll see where we are. So as a comparison, if I pop this back in place, there we go, that's what we're looking at. So there we go, as a quick comparison, obviously the one on the right hand side or the front has been given a quick weathering wash, and the most of the back here hasn't. Just really picks out the detail a little bit, and yeah, it just really adds kind of to the look of it. So I'm going to keep adding that, and then I'm going to start looking at kind of the rusting techniques. It's probably good to do a few coats. You can always add and remove all these washes, so I'll probably do this first coat, wait for it to dry, and then give it a second one, picking out kind of further details where I'm really looking to kind of highlight any areas or kind of where dirt would be picking up, like in the center here. You can see that the gutter on both sides has kind of really kind of got some dirt in it. So yeah, very simple technique, and that was literally just a case of adding basically a small amount of small amount of powders into some water, and it's just created a kind of a dirty looking wash. So I've now started working with the Rust-It. It's an interesting product. It's basically two kind of rust coloured paints. I think there is a little bit of texture, but it's not too noticeable. But I'm starting to kind of just gently kind of add the dark rust in some of the areas down under this kind of switch here. I'm going to add in any areas where I think rust would kind of accumulate, and that's generally where water would kind of accumulate. So probably in a lot of these joints and all that sort of stuff, that's probably where rust would be. And then on the top, I've kind of started to add a little bit. It's going to take a fairly long time, so that's just the dark rust, and then I'm going to have to wait for some of that to dry, add some of the lighter rust, and then I'm going to probably go again with some more of the black washes and just kind of build it up. Ultimately, when we're weathering things, we're trying to kind of get an appearance of time, and basically this is a long process of rain kind of hitting these and aging them over time. So I'm going to basically apply it in kind of maybe 3 or 4 different layers, and just to see what we can kind of get in terms of an effect. I have added a little bit more as well, just to kind of these areas, so you can just see where the kind of pipe goes into the green there. Kind of thing there's a little bit around there, a tiny bit at the top of that pipe there. So it's just kind of a nice little effect. It just adds a little bit more detail. Been thinking about the dark colours on the green here. I might try and add kind of maybe a lighter wash, or a white or a light grey or something, just to kind of bring out some of the kind of age look in that. I think with a lot of dark colours, they tend to lighten over time. So I'll probably go and find a whitewash in a minute and just apply some of that to the green areas to kind of lighten them up a little bit. So I've just applied a second wash to the roof, starting to kind of blend some of that rust in a little bit, and kind of patches where it's naturally darker. I'm going to leave it on a little bit heavier this time. So before I kind of mopped up some of the excess, you can kind of see around here it's kind of very wet, certainly in the gutter. I'm going to actually leave that this time, so it'll take a bit longer to dry, but then hopefully it should give me kind of the effect where rain has been caught kind of in the grooves of the tin. So I'm going to leave that there. You can see I've kind of given the green cabinet a bit of a whitewash, and I kind of think that that's kind of toned it down a little bit and made it quite nice. So it helps the rust stand out a little bit on the sides there, so quite happy with that. The next step while I wait for the canopy to dry is going to be to add some more washes to the floor here. So as we saw in the picture earlier, there's a lot more kind of browns and greens, so I'm going to make up a bit of a brown wash and then a green wash, and kind of apply those quite liberally as well, and hopefully we'll go from there. And then I think the final step would be to add kind of a bit more of a concentrated dark wash, as if it was kind of diesel kind of leaks and all that sort of stuff. So at the moment there's certainly bits of it where it's kind of dried up, looks like spills and all that sort of stuff around here, but it'd be nice to just have a slightly darker kind of look. But generally pretty happy with how it's kind of coming together. It certainly looks a lot more worn and used than it did before. So I've used a little bit of green and brown, and basically I ended up dropping some kind of watered down acrylic paint just straight into kind of another dark wash, and it's just kind of given that kind of greeny look without being too over the top. Lots of brown. I think it probably needs another go of brown. I think it's still a little bit grey, and obviously once this is dried up it should look a little bit lighter as well, but generally very happy with how that's kind of coming together. The roof, I've also added a tiny bit of kind of green as well. Hopefully when that's dried up it'll kind of look quite nice. So I'm just going to leave these to dry for a few hours now, and then I'll come back to it, and then I'll see if it needs another coat of wash or anything, but it's kind of getting to a point where I'm fairly happy with it. It might need to just go back together and be kind of fully constructed and finally detailed. So a few more coats later, and I'm finally kind of at a point where I'm fairly happy with the colours and the way it's all looking. There's still quite some heavy kind of oil coming out of the tanks and around the bottom, and generally a bit more of a kind of brown spillage around the area, but I think all in all it looks fairly kind of realistic. The roof's not been done too heavily, there's just areas of kind of rust, and like I said, that guttering channel has been kind of filled out. I think generally I'm fairly happy with that. So I'm going to put everything back together now, and then add some final bits, and then get back to you when it's done. So here we go, the fueling point's been put back together now. All the parts have been put in place. Most of it's been glued in place except for the main shelter, which I'm going to leave off just to allow me access in case I ever need repairs or anything like that. Very happy with how it's all come out. So since we last had a look, I've added all the pipes back in. The ends of the pipes have been added as well, so there's kind of some hoses and various attachments that I assume go to locos and ensure that the fuel is delivered properly. Big thanks to Marcus at Galveston Parkway, who suggested that you can use solder that's just painted up as hoses. I think it's certainly a lot better than the oversized ones that were supplied with the kit. There you go, that's kind of the difference. So it really would have looked quite chunky, and there didn't actually seem to be enough either. So I'm quite glad that I've picked that tip up from Marcus, so thank you for that. Just kind of allows me to have a lot more of them and run them longer, and they look a bit finer, which gives us that kind of slightly messy look that I mentioned when we were looking at that picture earlier. As well as the other bits, I've taken a couple of barrels and given them a bit of rust. I think that looks fairly effective. There's certainly a few more that came with the kit, so at some point I will get those filed down and painted up as well, but it just gives a nice kind of addition to the scene. A little bit of kind of rust was added to the back of the sign, as if maybe kind of the nails that it was pinned up with have kind of rusted away a little bit. But generally, it's pretty much as it was. The roof was given another couple of coats of the dark wash, but I didn't add too much rust in the end because I kind of felt that it's pretty much in a condition that I'm quite happy with. In real life, everything, this looks a little bit darker than it does on camera, but generally it's something I'm fairly happy with. Just before I go today, I want to give a shout out to a new channel that's recently popped up, run by a guy called Chris, and that's Lynchwood Sidings. For me, it's a really cool channel because it models exactly the same era as I am doing, so it just kind of perfectly captures my interest. It's an end-to-end layout. I'm using Tim Horn boards and will be exhibited on the exhibition circuit, but it's kind of a work in progress, but made a really good start on that as Chris. So I will pop the channel in the I button now, so why not go and check that out. But that is it from me today, so enjoy your week ahead, and I will see you next week on St Michael's Hill, where fingers crossed I'll be running you through the track plan of the new layout and showing you exactly where this fuel point's going to fit within that. Thanks very much, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye. As always, thank you for stopping by. If you like what you've seen today, there's another video in the top left-hand corner that I think you'll enjoy as well. Why not subscribe by clicking on the icon in the bottom right-hand corner. It really helps to support the channel. And click the notification bell if you want to be reminded of content when it goes up. Thanks very much.